That's awesome. But to get us started, because I think this is funny. With like .NET Core happening and open source and all this sort of stuff happening within the community, I thought I'd show this as it's kind of a little bit funny if you haven't seen it before.
They appear to be the perfect family.
Eksporter alle OLE-objektene med kommandolinjen, slik at det blir tilgjengelig. Eksporter alle OLE-objektene med kommandolinjen, slik at det blir tilgjengelig for internettinformasjon.
But sometimes appearances can be deceiving.
Pappa, hvorfor bruker vi alltid .NET?
Hva mener du?
Ja, finnes det ikke noen andre utviklingsplattformer?
Nå tror jeg du skal legge deg og sove.
As a young boy discovers a new world unfolding.
Se så deilig, robust, sikkert, portabelt og skalerbart det er.
Hei du, hva gjør dere?
Jeg må bare kose oss med noen porno.
Ja, dere driver ikke med Java og åpen kildekode?
Nei.
Nei, det er fint.
For being young is all about experimenting.
Hva er det du holder på med der inne?
Ikke noe.
Hallo?
Ja, jeg er snart ferdig, far.
God jul?
But a secret can't stay a secret forever.
Far. Mor, jeg må fortelle dere noe. Jeg bruker Java.
Hva i helvete er det du sier?
Vi bruker et programmeringsspråk som ikke bare fungerer i Windows.
Det er feil!
Portabilitet har aldri vært en prioritering for Microsoft, det vet du selv, far. Men hvis den er et monster!
Microsoft gir oss nettbaserte applikasjoner som deler informasjon med andre applikasjoner via webtjenere. De gjør oss faktisk i stand til å sende XML-meldinger! Vi er solgt! Vi er solgt!
Skal man ikke kunne gjøre selvstendige valg ut fra egne behov? Far! Far!
But sometimes the truth comes with a terrible price.
Kanskje du hadde rett, far. Kanskje .NET er bedre enn Java. Jeg mener det enkleste er å la Microsoft velge.
Java er mye bedre. Du kan gjøre finjusteringer og balanseringer som ikke kan gjøres med Microsoft. Java er fremtida.
From the acclaimed director of Javatar and .NET, Eddie Larison, Scala Johansson, two-time Golden Duke winner William Windows, a compelling performance by Mona Lisa Hard Drive, and introducing Lenny Linux. Java forever.
Has anyone actually seen that one before? No, that's freaking awesome. I think, it just, it reminds me of the times we live in that, that was made, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even more now. I remember seeing it when I was in university. And so it's like, the joking about, cross-platform, considerations and, where .NET can actually run and, all these type of different things. I think it's just shows how far .NET's come, in the years since something like that was made. So, welcome to, Web Diagnostics with a glimpse into ASP.NET. So, we've increased our numbers from like 2 that we started to, we've now got 6. Bring it on, okay? So, but I do have to say, and maybe I'm just being self-deprecating here, just for everyone who is wondering, I am not Scott Allen. So if you're expecting to see Scott Allen talking, that you've come to the wrong room, and it's okay, you can still leave if that's who you were intending to come and see. I will be very heartbroken. You think that guy had a heart attack over like his son programming Java, like 1/6 of my audience leaving, that would be extremely heartbreaking for me. So be careful of what your decision is, okay? Good, no one's leaving. So who's actually from Australia? Is anyone international here? So we got, no, you're from Australia. Yep. Anyone else? So everyone's from here. Okay, so is Sydney? Hands up. No? Oh, one person from Sydney. What about Brisbane? Yay, I'm from Brisbane too. Okay, and so what about Melbourne? Okay, 3. So Adelaide? In the corner with the yellow shirt. Perth? Tasmania? Oh, I asked who was international before. Okay, there you go. Anyway, okay, cool. Well, I currently live in the United States. I work for Microsoft. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I spend all my time working on diagnostics for the web. And so I think that's pretty awesome. And so today we're going to be trying to figure out what we can do to help make you guys better. And so welcome. As I said, my name's Anthony. If you've got any questions, we've got a small enough audience here. Feel free to just yell out or put your hand up, and we'll get into it. And if you've got any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or anything like that. Post this talk and we can get into it. So, today, as I said, we're really looking at like how we can make you guys awesome. And making you awesome is all about trying to help you understand what's actually going on inside of your web application. And, how we're going to be doing this is looking at diagnostics for the web. Okay, so if you've ever had that question about, like, what is my application actually doing, what actually happened to fulfill this web request that I just made, those are the type of answers that we're going to be giving you today, or attempting to give you, and we'll be having a look at a vision into the future of what's actually coming. So let's actually take a quick glimpse here. So who's actually heard or seen Glimpse before? Anyone? So one person, great. So let's actually have a look. So I've got NBC Music Store. Okay, everyone seen that before? It's kind of like an online e-commerce store. You can go buy different albums, add them to your shopping cart and all this sort of stuff. Really, really typical e-commerce sort of site. And the one thing that's different here, though, is you'll notice a bar at the bottom of the page, okay, that's giving you information about what's going on here. And what you'll see straight off the get-go is that we know that the page took 14 milliseconds 14 seconds, to load. Okay, and this is happening because this is the first time we ran, the JIT, compiling everything and whatever else. So it takes a little while the first time. And we can even break that down to know that, okay, well, 235 milliseconds happened on the server, okay, versus 14 seconds on the server, okay, and then on the client it was actually pretty fast. It was only 233 milliseconds, okay? And so we can start breaking that down. And when we break that down even further, we can see, well, the actual action, okay, took 822 milliseconds, and then the view took just over 1 second. And so you might be wondering, well, where did all the rest of the time go? Turns out that's all happening with the compilation and JITs and everything like that, okay? And so that's where that's going. But we can also know that we had 3 database queries that occurred on this page, which in total took 25 milliseconds, okay? So right from the get-go, we can start seeing, some of the data information about how our page is performing, where time considerations are going, where different slow points might be, okay? And here's another page which is probably a little bit more typical of your rendering that you'd expect, okay, because we're not doing that compilation or jitting or anything like that. Beyond that, we can actually kind of mouse over these different sections and get deeper data. So here we know that what the host name is. If we were logged in, we'd actually get kind of our login credentials that show up there too. And then we can actually break down the server even more than that. Okay, so we know from previously that the server time action was 229 milliseconds, but we know how much was the rendering, how long was on the server. We can start breaking down the different actions that occurred. And in .NET Core, okay, or ASP.NET Core, MVC's got the concept of view components as opposed to child actions. Okay, so we can actually see those broken down as well. And we can see that each one of those items had a database query within them. Okay, and we can see exactly how long that took. So typically, if you didn't have something like this, and you were trying to figure out like, oh, that page just went slow. Who's ever had that occurrence where, you navigated to a page, and it's like it went slow, and you're like, did that really go slow? And then you go back and you hit refresh, and it went fast, and you're like, well, I can't do anything about that now. I've got no clue. Anyone ever had that before? Yeah, okay, cool. So with this is where you can actually go. That felt slow, okay, and you can actually start digging into, well, what was actually the cause of that problem, okay? If we had AJAX requests on this page, we'd see the AJAX ticker, you know, showing those different requests that occurred. And then if we want to dive even deeper, if this information wasn't deep enough, okay, we can click on the G, okay, and that opens up this web portal, and we can actually see a breakdown of those requests even more, okay? And so we knew from previously, the previous screen, that we had the main action that occurred, and then we had the two view components, and we can actually see that, and we can see the SQL statements that actually made up those requests, okay, or those queries. Okay, so is this sort of making sense? Like, we're trying to give you this visual picture of what's going on within your application. Okay, cool. Now, just to, you know, as a stating up front, you know, all of this is, you know, 100% free. Okay, it's available today. It's just a NuGet package that you can install within your project. 100% open source. Okay, so if you're interested in how we're collecting any of this data, you can go ahead and look for yourselves. Okay. So that's kind of like the basis of what we'll be looking at today. So from there, let's get into this. Kind of like diagnostics, and this is like a little bit of the history around how we came to what we've got here, and, you know, kind of what makes some of this stuff tick. You know, I really felt as if diagnostics is one of the hardest things that we can do. Okay? There's this famous quote by Brian here that says, debugging is twice as hard as writing the code in the first place. Therefore, if you write your code as cleverly as possible, you are therefore, by definition, not smart enough to debug it. Who's ever felt that before? Okay? I know I have. And this is a problem because 40 to 60% of our time we spend debugging. Okay? And so this is not that great, okay, because when we go into debugging mode, we're dropping out of that creativity mode. I know that, you know, when my mum asks me what I do, I tell her I'm an artiste. You know, I create things and whatever else, and she calls BS on me, but, you know, that's what I feel. You know, it's like I'm really in the zone of what it is that I'm doing. So if I need to drop out of that to try and figure out, you know, what went slow, or, you know, what was a query that was actually produced there, that's a big issue, okay? And the other thing is the web isn't simple, okay? It's only getting more and more complex. As much as, you know, we at Microsoft are trying to make things simpler, the landscape is getting more complex, okay? And so the more ways that we can actually break this down and try and, you know, give you more visual guidance and more tips as to what's actually going on, that's only a good thing. So if we take a look at like what the current approach is, and, you know, some of this, the reasons behind why Glimpse was born was out of this kind of landscape. And so if we have a look, you know, fundamentally, debugging and diagnostics hasn't really changed in the last 20 years, okay? We still have breakpoints, okay? We've all seen screens like this where we've set breakpoints all over the place to try and figure out what's going on. We've still got log files, okay? And who's ever trawled through one of these log files trying to figure out what's going on? Yeah. And we've got kind of like static analysis, okay? And reality is these tools aren't really good enough. You know, something's kind of missing here. And so when I start thinking about this and breaking it down, you know, I start thinking, well, these tools are too low level, okay? They feel like very, very blunt instruments, okay? And, you know, when we have a look at like these breakpoints that we got, you know, it feels even like a bit like a code smell, okay? Except this is more like a tool smell. You know, the fact that we have full command palettes and stuff like this to configure your breakpoints, something's wrong with that. You know, you know, it's the 21st century. We should have better tools, okay? We should have better things here. You know, and trying to correlate, you know, all the log statements for an individual given request, you know, that's not something we can just do. You know, it's not just a given. And the other thing is the runtime is dynamic, okay? Like when we have a look at how MVC does what it does, you know, with different filters that can augment what's going on, or even now in ASP.NET Core, you've got different pieces of middleware that can be at play. And so something suddenly changes your request to a 500, you know, what did that? Okay, as far as I was concerned, when the action and the view were complete, it was a 200. You know, what changed it to a 500? Okay, where did that go wrong? Or it went from a, you know, 200 to a 304. Where did that happen? Why did that happen? okay? And so things are only getting more complicated and complex. And the reality is if with that complexity, static analysis can only get us so far, okay? Because the runtime is kind of where the truth is, okay? And context is kind of king of, you know, what's actually happening. And so this brings up some important questions that we, you know, start to ask ourselves if we're wanting to address this. And, you know, this kind of brings up a little bit of the history around how Glimpse was born. You know, it wasn't a product that came out of Microsoft. It actually started about 5 years ago when I was working in New York, and I was standing on a subway platform with my business partner, Nick. And, you know, we were talking about how do we educate people about how MVC1 works. Okay, because if you put yourself back into like MVC1 days or even, you know, under classic ASP.NET, trying to figure out routing, you know, if you'd come from like a web forms background where an individual page equaled a URL, you know, that was hugely different, okay? Or even the basic filtering that we had back then, trying to understand how that worked, or model binding, any of these different things was really complex. And at the company we were working for, we were in charge of educating people. Okay, so how do you convey those concepts to people? Okay, and this is where we started coming up with the concept of what Glimpse has turned into today, and will continue to evolve too. So literally, we were saying, well, we as developers have a mental model of how the application is put together. Okay, and that mental model is typically informed by the different frameworks that you actually use. So how can we build a physical picture of what's going on within your application based off what's actually happening at runtime, okay? And the other thing we were trying to do is how do you know if things are running as expected? And we've had some use cases back when we were working on this, like you know, in terms of like educating people before Glimpse was created, where it turned out that one of the issues we had was that this user in Turkey was complaining about a particular issue, and it turned out that the way that MVC processes data sent by in the post rather than the get is interpreted differently in terms of cultures. Okay, and so that works really well if both cultures are English, but as soon as one was Turkish and one was English, it started to play up. Okay, and these were the types of problems that we were wanting to solve. So what if it's possible? Okay, and this is where, you know, we started thinking, okay, well, what tool could we actually build to do this? And that's kind of like enter Glimpse. And so we're on that subway and we're like, okay, well, we know we want to get this data. Okay, so we've got to start aggregating this data together and kind of starting to crunch it and try and, you know, figure out how we can actually build the mental model, okay, or build the physical version of the mental model that you have. We also wanted to bridge client and server. Okay, so a request isn't just what happens on the server, okay, it's also what happens on the client. And so what we were trying to say is, okay, well, if a request isn't just one or isn't just the other, how do we build something that gives you that mental model of everything that happened from the click, you know, over the network, onto the server, maybe you've got some microservices to other services that are in play, back over the network to the client, and continuing on past rendering. Okay, that's what a request is. And at the moment, our tools give us one or the other. Okay, Visual Studio gives us a server very nicely, okay, and F12 tools give us the client very nicely, but both have a black box as far as the client is concerned. Okay, and the other thing that both of those tools tend to suffer from is what I was saying earlier on, and being very blunt instruments, they're very low level. Okay, so, you know, we're wanting to raise up the level of abstraction here in terms of, you know, the way that we think of things. We also wanted to have like framework level insights. Okay, so based on the frameworks that you're actually using, how do we inform what's actually going on? You know, what happens if Visual Studio could actually change based on the knowledge that it knew that you were using Entity Framework, or that you were using MVC, or Hibernate, or whichever framework out there that you're actually using, or even, you know, Angular versus React. You know, what would you want to see? Okay, and so this is the path that we started down. So let's start having a look here. Okay. So what we're actually looking at here is an early beta version, okay, of Glimpse v2, okay? And so Glimpse v1 is kind of the mature product that we have out there for the moment, okay, that targets classic ASP.NET scenarios. And so let's have a look at that. And this is something that anyone can take a look at and get up and running and kind of like demo if you want to have a look at things once you get back home. Okay, so this is Azure website, okay, and so if anyone's got a laptop, you can go there now and start playing around with this stuff if you want to, okay? As we've already stated, we've got this bar at the bottom of the page, which is showing everything that we have. Now, the experience is a little different. As I said, this is V1 that I'm showing at the moment, okay, for classic ASP.NET. I think it's running on an MVC5 app, okay? We'll show you this first, okay, because this is more feature complete, because what I've got for ASP.NET Core is much more in its infancy, okay? And so we've already seen kind of the guts of what these different tabs can do when we mouse over them. Here we can actually see a news ticker, okay, of AJAX requests that are going through in real time. And so this is something we didn't see earlier. So as this goes, ticks through, we can mouse over these and we can actually see those requests happening in real time. Now, the reason all of these have got the same URL and pretty much look all the same is it's just pinging in a loop, you know, the particular news feed to try and get the data back. Okay, so these results are to be expected. But, you know, if we wanted to see any one of these in deeper detail, we could by just clicking on these. But for here and now, we want to see the actual detail of this particular request. So for here, we can click on the G and up will pop this panel, okay? And so from here, we can start diving into a lot more information, okay, about what's going on to actually make this request. So kind of starting off, we're looking at configuration settings. So in classic ASP.NET, we have web.config. In ASP.NET Core, we've got the new configuration system. You can imagine this working the same for .NET Core as it does for .NET Classic. So here we can actually see we've got our app settings. And so who's ever been in a situation where you don't necessarily have access to production or something like this, and you've got a small update which might include a web configuration change, and you've done the deployment, okay, but it's someone else who's in charge of doing that in like DevOps or something like that. And so what you've actually done is you don't know whether or not the change is applied. Has anyone ever, you know, been in that sort of situation? Yeah, okay. And so here, what we can actually do is go in and actually see, okay, what the settings actually are, okay, and how they've applied. So here we can actually see, you know, whether or not this particular setting is disabled or not, okay? Or likewise, you know, we've got some glimpse particular settings here. We can see what's at play there. We can also see what our connection strings are. Okay, and so from here we can see not only the raw string, okay, as it was registered, but we can actually see how the system interpreted that. Okay, so for here we know how the system is actually interpreting our query string, and we can see that the max pool size is actually 100 here. Let me try and see if I can increase the font a little. Hopefully that's a little better. Okay, so we can see that. As we continue to go down, we can even see how our authentication is set up. Okay, and for this particular app, it's not very interesting. But if you had a more complex authentication setup, we'd see all the information broken down. You know how that's actually processed. We can see the role manager. Okay, you can start to see a pattern here. We're seeing everything that's registered within the system. Okay, and finally, we can even see like the HTTP modules and handlers. Who uses HTTP modules or handlers inside of their apps? Okay, we've got one too. So it turns out these things are actually hooks, okay, for those who haven't used them or seen them before, of, you know, how you can tap into different parts of the page lifecycle, you know, arbitrarily, or how you can actually serve up assets, okay, which is the handlers. And it turns out, like, you can't really predict the order in which these things will run in any deterministic way. Okay? So there's a class of problems that you can have that are reliant on knowing, you know, the order that these things have run or are registered, or if they're actually registered at all. Okay? So here we can actually see that glimpse itself is actually registered as a HTTP module. Okay? That's how we actually know what's going on and where the different parts of the page are actually loaded and stuff like this, tracking the beginning and end of a request. We can also see HTTP handlers, okay? And again, we can see glimpses registered here because it's actually got an endpoint that serves up these assets, okay? Because everything that you're actually seeing here, this isn't a browser plugin or anything like this. This is just JavaScript and HTML and CSS injected into your page, okay? And we render this bar into the bottom, okay? So that's what we're actually seeing here. And again, you can see the minute details of how all this stuff's actually registered. Okay, so from here, we can start having a look at environments. Okay, so again, kind of in that like deployment scenario, you were told you were going to be migrating from one machine to another machine. Did that actually occur? Okay, have I actually gone to that other machine? You know, I was expecting a particular operating system to be there. Okay, has that happened? You know, when was the last time the machine was restarted? Okay, all these sorts of questions that you might be wondering when you go to like test or production, you know, we can start unveiling those even though you might have, you know, access, admin access or RDP access into the machine to be able to manually verify these things. We can see the version of Windows Server, what versions of .NET, and again, here's kind of like the cultural information starting to be surfaced, so we can actually see that. We can see the process breakdown. So if you're trying to tie that back to a process that needs to be killed or something like that, we can see that pretty easily. Time zone settings. Who's ever been in a situation where, you know, the time zone of the server was off or something like this, and hence you're seeing all like the invoices being processed before they're actually ordered or something weird like this? Yeah, okay. So we can actually see these details, okay, without having to do that RDP. We can actually see too what application assemblies were loaded. Okay, so these are kind of like the different DLLs that you've manually added to your project, okay, versus all the various different system assemblies that have been loaded. What their version numbers are, you know, from NuGet and all this type of things, okay, where they've actually been loaded from as well. Right? So really, really important environmental data. So what we've seen so far is a lot about how the environment that you've been in, how it's configured, you know, answering the sorts of classes of questions that we've talked about so far. Okay? But from there, we start walking up the stack a little more, okay, and we start thinking about, well, how did this page, what actually executed to make this page run? Okay? And that's where we actually come to something like the execution tab. So here, we're actually seeing, you know, the different filters that actually ran. So we can see the first thing that actually executed here was the unauthorized filter for the home controller action. And we can see that that actually took 0 milliseconds, okay, because that's just an empty call, that's just an empty signature that you can override, or an empty method that you can actually override, versus on executing, okay, versus on executed, okay. And then you've actually got the core action itself, which is where most of the fun here happens. And so when we're having a look at, you know, why did this page take the time that it did, it wasn't the core action that took the length of time here. It was actually the cart summary that took up the majority of time here, 175 milliseconds. Okay? And it wasn't the actions, or sorry, it wasn't any of the filters or anything like this. So if you've got your own custom filters that are at play, you'll actually see these registered, okay, and you'll see them in the order that they've actually executed. And because I challenge anyone in this room, given like global filters, action level filters, control level filters, and all this sort of stuff, to list the order in which all of these things are supposed to execute. And again, that's kind of that static analysis view of the world. Doesn't really offer you what you need if you're trying to debug this sort of class of problem. Runtime is where the truth is. We can also start getting into like routes. And this particular route, you know, for this particular system isn't all that interesting. Okay, but you can imagine once you start getting 10s, 20s, you know, 50 routes, trying to understand why did a particular route match? Okay, why didn't another one? Okay, we can actually have a look and tell you, okay, let's say you've got constraints registered, you know, how it evaluated each of those different constraints. And for individual constraints, if it passed or if it failed. Okay, because you might have the same, let's say, a URL registered, okay, for multiple routes, but the constraints might be very different between the two. Okay, and this is where that sort of thing can start telling you why one hit. Try figuring out where to set a breakpoint to tell you why that happened. Okay, you can't unless you start working from the MVC source code. And then you get in that situation where you've set hundreds of breakpoints all over the place to try and figure out things. We can also see, you know, for these different tokens, what was the placeholders that it picked up from that, so understanding how it evaluated what you'd actually registered, and what were the defaults that it actually set there. Okay, and then we can actually see what did it actually, how did it actually evaluate that. So from here, we can actually, let's say, go to another page, okay? And we can see that instead of it being matching on home and index, okay, that was the default, but it actually matched on store and browse. Okay, and we can actually even see how long it took to evaluate these. Turns out there's some edge cases where you can get into where you can actually create a route that's really expensive to evaluate. Okay, so here we can start seeing, well, am I doing things efficiently, for the system that I have. We can even start getting into views here. Okay, so in this system at the moment, we've got both the web forms view engine, okay, and the Razor view engine registered in the system, which is what MVC or classic MVC does by default. Okay? You've got multiple view engines registered, and the vast majority of people only ever use the Razor view engine. Okay, so you can probably disable or remove the other view engine right out of the box. Okay, now it turns out MVC actually does some optimizations here, so the perf difference of actually doing that isn't going to be significant. Okay, but it is there. And we can see the order in which it tries to do things, okay? So because this is in production, things are optimized and it's cached the results and all this sort of stuff, so we can't actually see that at the moment here, okay? But at dev time, what you'll actually see is the different places that it actually looked on disk, okay, for the different views, okay, and whether or not they were actually matched or not, or why they were actually not matched. Okay. Then finally, we can actually see that, right, we did find a match, okay, and what was actually passed through to that view, okay, and what were the values and the types and everything like that that are actually passed through. And so we can see that, we've got these two entries for browse, cart summary, and genre menu, okay, so we can follow that through the system. We've also got things like request data. So here we're looking at kind of like the headers and the values and the query strings and all this sort of stuff for the request and response. And you might be saying, well, I can get this from the F12 tools. Well, it turns out the F12 tools give you this data from the perspective of the browser. Okay, it can tell you what the browser sent and what the browser received. But that can be very different to what the server actually received and what the server actually responded with. Yeah, I've been in situations before on client sites where it turned out they had some proxy in the way which was modifying headers. Okay, so this is where you could actually use this data to start figuring out, okay, well, if something goes wrong, what's the server's perspective on this? Okay, and start actually breaking that down. We can get into like model binding. How was that actually interpreted? And like looking at as I said before, like the culture and the different ways in which it tried to match the values for the action that you've got. Metadata. Okay, if you're doing cool things with binding to input elements, okay, and using the metadata system to help provide that, okay, we can actually start getting right into that and into the details there. Okay, so from there, we start realizing that, okay, cool, we now have a pretty good understanding of the server, okay, how MVC is working, okay, but what about our database, okay? What data can we actually get out of it, okay, and what understanding can we actually gain here? And so from this, we can actually go to the SQL Server tab, and we can start getting out some details here. So right from the get-go, we know that this page actually has 3 different connections, okay, that were caused and 3 different queries that were executed. And so from this, we can start correlating what actually happened here. So we actually know how long the total connection, or all of our connections were actually open for, and how long we're actually executing on them for. So in this case, we can see, well, the connection time was, 530 milliseconds, and total query time was 526 milliseconds. So we were pretty optimal. Like, we only really opened that connection for the length of time that we needed it, but you can get into cases where you might have opened that connection for 1,000 milliseconds, and you've only got 50 milliseconds worth of execution on it. Okay? So that raises the question, can we close this connection earlier? How can we do that? And again, without tools like this, how would we actually know whether or not that was the case? The other thing that we know here is that we're opening a connection per query that we actually have. Okay, and you might be in a position to go, well, can I actually pull those together? Okay, so I'm only using the one connection. Maybe you can't, but maybe that's something that we can do. then we can start breaking things down into the actual queries themselves, okay? And so in this case, Entity Framework is actually, we're using Entity Framework as our provider, and hence why the queries kind of look the way that they do. But that's where we start going, okay, well, this is the Entity Framework query that I wrote. It's not working the way that I expected it to. You know, how can I actually tweak this? And so we even do some small niceties here where, you know, the underlying query has this actual parameter that it puts in here, but we can actually put the value in there. So you can copy and paste this and execute it directly against the database if you're trying to tweak things or, you know, see what their raw values were and all this sort of stuff. We can see those parameters broken out by what their types and values were and things like that as well. We can see how many records were returned, what its individual duration was, because remember up the top here, we're totaling all the durations for all the requests, for all the queries, but we know this particular one wasn't the one that was expensive here. We can see the offset of where it occurred, whether it was async or not, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, trying to dig down on why this particular total query time here or execution time was 526 milliseconds. If we come down, we can see, well, this last query here was only 1.7 milliseconds, so the problems are not there. Okay, turns out this is our expensive query. Now, in this particular case, I don't have an idea of why this would be slow, okay? But what we can actually do is we've now identified that this page was slow because of this individual query. So pretty much we've excluded the rest of our app as the root of the problem. Okay, and we've narrowed it down to this one query, and that may be the case that we need to do some better indexing or, you know, who knows what. It may just be a freak occurrence of what was going on there. Okay, but we've really narrowed down and isolated that problem. So from here, you'll have noticed that on these various different tabs, we've got a lot of timing data, okay? And so the question starts coming, well, you know, Anthony, you've showed me over here on the left, you know, filters and executions and routes over here and model binding. You know, this is really good, but, you know, these things relate together. How can I kind of get an overview of everything that's going on? And that's where kind of like the timeline tab comes in. Okay, and so from here, this might look a little familiar from like the F12 tools, okay, but what we're seeing here is from the server's perspective, okay, and so we can see like, right, the request started up here, but then we've got those different filters that we're executing until we actually came to the controller. Within that controller, we can actually see where the database connection opened, when it was closed, how long the query actually executed for. This is the particular query that took 520 milliseconds, so we can actually see where that occurred in relation to everything else. And again, as we kind of navigate around the system, we can see this information updating in real time as we go from tab to tab. So you can see that updating. And again, this query is the one that's slow, so I would have a pretty good hunch that as we've gone from page to page, this one's been consistently slow. This is where we'd be best to kind of put our energy into to trying to fix, you know, the potential performance problem that we have here. And even down to things like we can start getting into trace, and this particular app, we've only got a few trace statements in here just kind of to demo the feature. But at the moment, if you do like console logging within your application, it's kind of hard to correlate the log statements back to the individual requests that it came from. So what we can actually do is listen to the logs that are being generated for a particular page, okay, correlate those together and show them back to you, okay? So really trying to make the logging information that you put out or different frameworks that you put out, really trying to make that sort of stuff useful, okay? Finally, we start thinking about things like Ajax, as I mentioned before, and we've got this Ajax tab that we can come to. And so as Ajax requests actually happen within the system, we'll see them appearing here in real time, okay? And so for any one of these, we can click Inspect, okay, and we'll see all of the data that we've been collecting here for that particular Ajax request. Yeah, that's because an Ajax request is just a request. There's nothing particularly special about it as far as the server is concerned. And so what we can actually do here is click on this, and when that data actually comes in, okay, we can see all of the tabs pulsing, kind of meaning they're updating. The UX isn't the best here. We can see the URL is changed. So if I go to like kind of like the timeline tab now, we can see that's a lot simpler, okay, than a lot of our other tabs, okay, or a lot of our other pages that we're looking at. Okay, and that's because the data that we're feeding up here is really simple. We don't have any, child actions that we're executing on here or views that we're going through or anything like this. This is just kind of like raw files that we're kind of serving up here, okay, kind of like the minimal MVC pipeline that you can possibly have. And so that's what we're trying to show. And then you can kind of go back to the origin request if you want, okay, and now we're seeing, the root page that we're looking at again. And so we could do that for any one of these AJAX requests. Now, one of the interesting things that you start getting to when you start thinking about this stuff is, okay, I remember when we came up with this feature and kind of were demoing it to people and stuff like that, I said to Nick, I think I can get Glimpse working for the mobile, okay? There's this thing called responsive CSS, and, I can make it so the Glimpse UI will pop up at the bottom of the phone. How cool would that be? And he was like, you're an idiot, okay? And so I was like, you're probably right about that, okay? But what we're actually doing, because we're recording a history, okay, of the different requests that are occurring, we can start recording a history for the requests that are happening from your phone, for instance, okay? So you can be doing development on your dev machine, okay? Open up your phone, or connect through to the server that you're debugging on, okay, and come through to history, and we can start seeing the requests that are happening on other devices, okay? So if I actually came in here onto the phone, and we start going through to play.getglimpse.com, as long as I've typed in the URL there. Oh, Hilton Wi-Fi wants me to connect. If someone else, whilst I'm talking, can connect through, that would be good. Play.getglimpse.com. We'll actually see that pop up in real time, okay? We can actually watch those people navigate around, okay? And so I can see there's a couple of people have opened phones here, so we'll start seeing those pop in a sec. Now this is really interesting, not only from kind of like a local debugging scenario, okay, that's also useful when we start to debug other people, okay? And so you can imagine that scenario where that user's in Turkey or whatever else, and you're like, hey, I want to help debug the problem that you have. And so here we go, we're watching Safari 9 here navigating around. Okay, so someone's got an iPhone out there, and I'd say someone's got maybe Android or something like that. And so from here, we can actually click on any one of these, and again, all of these tabs are updating. And so what I'm now seeing is all of the timeline details for that particular request that Safari 9 here made. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So the question was, if anyone can go to this play.getglimpse URL and see what's going on here, is that a problem? Which is what I'm guessing you are thinking in your head in terms of like security and. Yes. So when the tab pops up at the bottom of the page, okay, this bar, okay, before we open up Glimpse, you're seeing just your activity, okay? So this is restricted just to you. So it doesn't matter how many different people are using the website, you'll see just this. When you open up the G, okay, and by default, when you're looking at any of these other tabs, you'll just see just your request. Likewise for AJAX, just your AJAX requests. Where that behavior starts to modify is when we look at history, okay? And that's where we start looking at like the clients, and you can give names to these different clients by setting a cookie, okay? So if you've got multiple people, let's say in a test environment, you could set the name to be the user ID of the person, okay? So it's actually useful. But anyone that would on that machine would be able to see each other's requests. Which kind of leads down the path of like how does security work for Glimpse, okay? Now in this case, if anyone goes to play.getglimpse, okay, they'll see Glimpse. But that's not the default behavior. I've actually cut out all the security mechanisms within Glimpse so that anyone wanting to come and see how Glimpse works can actually do that. But by default, it's locked down, okay? So it's locked down to local host. So do you know how you've got like yellow screen of death will only give you useful information if you're on localhost, kind of like by default. That's the same as what we've done here. So you can only ever get this data, and the data will only ever be recorded by default if you're on localhost. Additionally, even if you are on localhost, you have to set a cookie in order to see the information. That's just flagging to Glimpse, hey, please start recording my sessions. Okay? For some reason, you might want every request collected here. So the way you do that, and to make it easy, is in your development time, you'll go to glimpse your website /glimpse.axt, okay, and actually click, the turn on Glimpse button, okay, and that essentially just runs some JavaScript which sets a cookie, and then you'll start seeing Glimpse, okay, within your app. And this security is actually pluggable. So if you wanted to have some logic that said only, all this is good, but then I want it to be actually remotely viewable, okay, because I don't want to give all the devs RDP access to my server. So the way you could do that is then set up a policy that restricted people by IP or, some other arbitrary logic which you could think of. We essentially give that extension, okay, or that security mechanism, the HTTP context, and then you can use whatever's available off that and whatever other data you've got available to determine whether or not, Glimpse should be turned on or off. And you can even get into some really interesting scenarios. Let's say we've got that user in Turkish, or in Turkey. We want to profile what they're doing, but we don't want them to see it. Okay, meaning we don't want them to see Glimpse because there's potentially sensitive information there. So you can turn Glimpse on in a write-only mode, which means we'll record what they're doing, but they can't see it. But then you will have the security to be able to write and read, okay, and so that you'll actually see them pop up in the list in real time and be able to track through with what they're doing. And so this sort of stuff is really interesting and really useful. Let's say you're in a government department, you've got an app that you're supporting which has got like 100 users or something like this, and Sally comes over and says, hey, look, I've got this issue. You can go, right, either you coordinate on the phone or take over your laptop and you can sit with her, and actually debug in real time and actually see it without having to try and figure out, well, how do we set a breakpoint on the production site without, killing everyone's experience and all this sort of stuff. Okay? So we're actually starting to get really useful information out of this. And so that's kind of like an overview of those top features. I haven't gone through every single tab here, okay, but it's something that you can explore. Now, what we've talked about here, as I said, is this is all Glimpse v1. Okay, this all works with classic ASP.NET, MVC. There's a whole bunch of different plugins out there to support the ecosystem. Because as I said, the vision was, this should work regardless of whether you're using Entity Framework or in Hibernate or any of these sort of different frameworks. So you can go to NuGet and actually do a search for Glimpse, and you'll see a whole bunch of different plugins actually show up for Glimpse. So here we've got like over 100 different ones that the community has actually contributed. So, depending on what you're using, you'll actually probably find a package out there for what you actually need. Okay? So that's Glimpse v1, but what we've actually got here, someone's trying to do a SQL injection attack there, or a cross-site scripting attack. Thank you very much for whoever was trying that. Yeah, I got you. So that brings us to Glimpse v2, okay? So what's Glimpse v2 about, okay? Glimpse v2 is kind of the next evolution of what we're thinking here, okay? And by default, we'll make it work for ASP.NET Core to start with, okay? And so from there, you'll have noticed that that experience, even though the bar at the bottom of the page is the same, okay, the experience when we open up Glimpse is very different. Okay? And that's where we start to get this full page experience, okay, as opposed to just a panel at the bottom of the page. And a lot of that was born out of our experience where it's kind of hard to design UX for a little panel in the bottom of your page. Okay? So what we've actually realized is that, well, we can kind of gear this experience towards kind of like your dual monitor sort of setup where you've got your app or your website running on one screen and you've got Glimpse on the other, and you can actually, the two will be in lockstep as you're actually navigating around the website. So let's actually see what that might look like. So bring this one down here. And then, we can see that Glimpse is actually sticking with us here. Oops. A little harder on a laptop screen. Okay, so as I'm going through, it's sticking with me in real time. So this is kind of the experience that we're gearing towards. The UX for this, for the final product will be extremely different to what we have now. What you're actually seeing here is kind of the result of myself and Nick prototyping here. We now have a team of about 8 people working on this. Okay, so what we actually have is leaps and bounds ahead of what we have here now. And this is going to be a full product that Microsoft is going to be delivering. But this is kind of very, very early bits that we're starting to get feedback on here. Additionally, what we've started to do is previously you would have noticed that the individual tabs very much felt like, and this is kind of, I can say this because I created it, but we're kind of like we're spewing up data. Okay, it was an exercise in like, hey, what information can we get? What would be useful for these different scenarios? Okay, let's dump out that data. Okay, oh, let's dump out this data. Okay, whereas now we're really starting to think about, okay, how do we produce a representation of, or a diagnostics picture here that actually starts to really match that mental model that you have in your head. Okay, so for instance, 90% of the time, you don't care about all the routes and how all the routes were individually evaluated. You care about the route that was evaluated for this particular request. Okay, that's the 90% use case. And in terms of model binding, you don't care how each individual value was evaluated, meaning in this case, I don't care 90% of the time how it got 3. I care the fact that it did get 3. Okay, and that's what it actually found for ID. Okay, now you should be able to dig into that if you want to, okay, but this 90% use case is what we're trying to get to, and so then we can actually see, okay, cool, that's model binding information that happened. And here's the SQL query, okay, all in context, okay, without having to go to, a whole bunch of different screens to try and patch together what actually happened here, okay. So this is the direction that we're heading in, and you'll actually see this get much, much richer. And we can even see that this starts to really work in scenarios like this, where I went to this page for the first time, ride the lightning, and if I refresh it, okay, we'll actually see that we don't have 3 SQL queries anymore. Okay, so if I go back to the previous one, details 3 here, we had the 3 queries, okay, but then the action here didn't have that database query. Okay, and it turns out that's because we're actually caching the data. So this is a bit of a vision of the future. Okay, expect this to get much, much richer, much more framework support. Yeah. Sorry? For this? So okay. So currently what we have on Nougat.org, okay, supports RC1, okay, of .NET Core. That's a problem. So what I've got on this machine and what I'm hoping to deploy tonight actually supports RTM. So that's first step. Then in terms of the next evolution of this, okay, which is, as I said, leaps and bounds ahead of where we are at the moment, that'll be hopefully before the end of the year, okay? It turns out some of this stuff is quite complex, and we've got some pretty grand visions, and so trying to tie that all together is important. So trying to wrap this up, what do we actually have here, okay? What we've realized is that we have information, and this is kind of looking back at this stuff, we have information at different levels. Okay, so one of the things, who's ever heard of a guy called Martin Fowler? Yeah, okay. I was in a talk that he gave once, actually in Brisbane, and he was talking about the fact that, what would you want to see if you could fly in a plane at 10,000 feet over your code, okay? And so I use that analogy, for this, if for the debugging and diagnostics, what would I want to see if I could hop in a plane and fly at 10,000 feet over kind of the live running of my page, at development time. And so here, kind of the 10,000 foot view is HUD, that bar that sits in the bottom of the page. The 8,000 foot view is timeline. 5,000 foot view is the tabs. Trace tabs specifically, and then kind of like the existing tools that we have, kind of the 1 foot view is the breakpoints and log files and stuff like this. I'm not saying there's no place for a breakpoint. There's times when you need to know what I equals, okay, but that shouldn't be where you start to figure out which route was matched. Surely we can do a better job than that. We also realize that we have different modes of development. We're kind of gearing this towards the learner, kind of like the person who doesn't fully understand how MVC works or ND framework or whatever else. What information can we actually give to do that? the debugger, okay, so the person who actively has a problem and is trying to sort this stuff out, and then the developer who, you know, doesn't necessarily has a problem, is doing his day-to-day work, okay, and in this case, you might have a junior developer on the team who just introduced an n+1 query, okay, which is where you're in a loop, okay, and you're executing the same query effectively over and over again, where you just have one parameter changed, okay, or the value's just updating, and that could be done as an in clause, okay, or instead of as an in rather than hundreds of queries executed over again. How would you know that without this? We're trying to create a diagnostics platform for the web, okay? So eventually, I don't want to be in the game of writing individual diagnostics for MVC or Entity Framework or whatever else. I want to create a platform where people who have different frameworks, whether they be, you know, things like MVC or Nancy, whether they be message buses, or whether they be whatever it happens to be, okay? How can we provide a unified view, okay, where these different authors can come together, create these experiences, okay, and those actually work together. If I've got a message bus over here that I write a tool for, okay, and I'm seeing that data in isolation, how does that reference the fact that I'm actually using MVC over here? You know, what happens if we could join those two together, okay, and give you that kind of holistic picture? We have a multi-framework ecosystem, okay, and that's kind of like what we've just been talking about. How do we get these things working together? We're really trying to create information targeted at understanding, okay? So it's not just the breakpoints and the log files. You know, what is that mental model that you have? How can we get that on page? And we're looking at something that's cross-platform, cross-browser, cross-platform, full stack. So as we start to get into kind of like .NET Core that runs on Linux and Mac and Windows, you know, we've got .NET, we've got Node, you know, we've got, you know, on the different browsers, Edge, Chrome, you know, how do we get this, you know, holistic picture end to end? And so, you know, in terms of kind of like finally summing up for this talk, you know, what's this all really about for you guys? You know, what we're trying to do is save you time, okay? If we can cut that, you know, 20 to 40% debugging and diagnostics time, you know, down to single digits, that's huge, okay? And it'll make you guys better. You know, saving you money. If we do cut that time down, okay, it's making you guys even better and better and more efficient at what you're doing and trying to make you kick ass, okay, in general. So go ahead and try it. If you've got existing, you know, .NET Classic apps, you know, Glimpse v1 is out there. You can try that, get it up and running in dev time and see what you think and give us feedback. You can go to getglimpse.com. As I mentioned, everything we have here is free and open source, okay? So if you want to contribute, if you want to get involved, we're more than happy to, you know, show you the ropes. Go forth and be awesome. Please leave feedback and thank you very much. Are there any questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes?
Earlier you had mentioned you made a slight reference to Microsoft. To what capacity are they involved in this project?
Cool. So going back in time, Glimpse was started as a community project, okay? Then we started to get sponsorship, okay? We were lucky enough to be in the position where we had Redgate Software, you might know them from different developer tools and database tools, came and said, we want to sponsor the project. So they effectively paid Nick and I to work on it full time, okay? Then, you know, when that eventually ran up, we started talking to Microsoft and saying, hey, look, we're a valuable part of the ecosystem, or we believe we are. You know, we'd love to continue working on this. Where can we go with this into the future? Okay? And so effectively what you'll find is that we'll essentially have something that looks very similar to like Chrome and Chromium, for instance. Okay? So we'll have the version of Glimpse, which is free and open source, 100%, but then you have Chromium, okay, which is pretty much exactly the same as Chrome, okay, just fully digitally signed and, you know, validated and, you know, backed by Google in that case. So for us, we've got VS Code, okay, for instance, which is completely free and open source. You can go to GitHub, download it, compile it, run it yourself. But then there's an executable, okay, which is, you know, available, which is the actual, official distribution, as it were. And so you'll find something similar to that. So yeah. We still own, the open source project and all that sort of stuff, or the community does, I guess. So as far as all that's concerned, it's not as if Microsoft bought Glimpse, if that makes sense. They couldn't. It's free, so or it's open source, which is more important. Yes.
So you mentioned efforts in terms of NDC.
Yeah.
Any movement like NCFX support?
Yeah. So good question. The question was, what are we planning to do to support kind of like NCFX and stuff like this? We have a very long history with the NCFX guys, and part of the issue with Glimpse v1 is we have a pretty hard dependency on system.web. At the time when we started 5 years ago, that seemed like not a problem. It was like one of those things like, hey, system.web, that's kind of important. It's not going anywhere. It turns out that's the one thing that did go somewhere over time. And so we actually have to we had to rewrite Glimpse from scratch pretty much to get rid of that dependency. Because it's not just, how do we access the URL or the headers and stuff like that. It's also how do we serve up our resources. Handlers don't exist. Modules don't exist. And so we went down the path of, trying to abstract those concepts out. Okay, so that we had kind of like, our own common abstraction, and then we had like an OWIN implementation and like the classic ASP.NET implementation or the system web implementation. Turned out that was a complete nightmare to try and maintain. And so then we went down the track of saying, okay, well, ASP.NET Core is coming out, okay, let's support it, okay, because it's OWIN. And there's the port through to, with the adapters through to kind of OWIN now. And then, that's kind of like being its own bundle of fun. So the long and the short of it is that we're 100%, on working on ASP.NET Core, okay, and system web. And so in terms of NCFX on .NET Classic, as it were, or ASP.NET Classic, we don't have a good story at the moment, is the long and the short of that. So what, we've had some conversations with them, in terms of like, are you looking at going to ASP.NET Core, the timing of that, when do we want to start looking at this and stuff like that. But, going to ASP.NET Core is a big deal for them too. Yeah, but I'm just saying in general, that's been a big effort for them as well. Yeah. And so it was, similar amounts of work for us as well to go to do the switch. And so, in terms of trying to support their efforts, I'd say that once we get this stuff out the door at the moment, we'll start talking to them and saying, okay, well, we've got these cool insights for, ASP.NET. How do we get similar sorts of stuff for Nancy? And some of the cool things that we actually have in like V2 is, at least for major community products, you won't necessarily have to download additional packages to get those things to light up, which is really cool. We've done some cool magic stuff now that we're a part of Microsoft, and we can say, hey, look, this sort of debugging and diagnostics is really important. We've actually built and contributed infrastructure into .NET Core to make the style of debugging and diagnostics that Glimpse actually does far easier to implement. And so that's really exciting as well. But, that's the sort of thing I care about, not necessarily everyone. But yeah, so cool time. So to answer your question, I don't have an exact time frame on that, but it's probably something we should start talking to them about and trying to make sure that we line up. Because that's definitely the sort of thing that we want to have, or provide support for, I should say. Any other questions? Feel free to come up afterwards. I do have Glimpse stickers, okay, if people who want any of the original Glimpse stickers before they all disappear. Feel free to come up and get some of those. If you have any questions, feel free to come up. But otherwise, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I don't always get to speak in Australia, and so it's really cool to be at my home country. So thank you very much for coming along. I know it's late. So thank you.